We are very honored to have John today. And then Professor John Macintyre is the Vice Chancellor at the University of Sunderland. He did his doctorate in applied artificial intelligence in the early 1990s and went on to establish the Centre for Adaptive Systems, which became recognized by the UK government as a Centre of Excellence in Applied AI. He has published more than 150 papers and given numerous keynote presentations at events around the world. He is the editor-in-chief of Neural Computing and Applications, a role he has held since 1996. Neural Computing and Applications publishes peer-reviewed original research on applied AI. John is also the co-editor-in-chief of a new journal, AI and Ethics, which he established with Professor Larry Musker of George Washington University this year. The first original research and thought leadership pieces were published online in AI and Ethics in October 2020. So we are very warm welcome to Professor John Macintyre, and then you may start your presentation as you like. And then, but before we start, oh yes, one more thing that is like this research is supported by the Research Grant Council. So the whole series that we will try to like put online for viewing in the future if the speaker agree. Okay. So thank you, John. You may start as by the time that you wish to start. You may start now.
Okay, thanks. First of all, welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for giving me the invitation and the opportunity to speak to everyone. Can you see me and hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. And I'm just about to start sharing my screen, so let me know that you can see my screen okay. Oh, it says I can't share my screen?
Oh, yeah, because, let me see. Okay, so you can share your screen now.
Okay, great. So let me just check that you can now see the presentation.
Yes.
And, okay, so you can see that. It should be on the first slide.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Good. Okay, well, so welcome everyone. Great opportunity to talk to you. Thanks very much. I hope everyone's safe and well. We're living in extraordinary times, and I'm going to talk about those extraordinary times just in a little bit in the context of the presentation. So my presentation is talking about what is happening in artificial intelligence, a little bit about the future of AI, and specifically why we need to build ethics into artificial intelligence. And as you can see, I've used a coronavirus design for my slides this morning because I'm going to start by using COVID-19, which is this terrible situation we're all living through. I think they're in Hong Kong. My friends in Hong Kong tell me that things are an awful lot better now in Hong Kong. They're certainly not very good here in the UK. We've got a variety of different lockdown measures in place. And so COVID-19, of course, has been, we're all learning a lot of lessons from COVID-19. But one of the lessons, and I wanted to use it as a means of kind of looking at the issues in AI, is what's happening with AI applications in COVID-19 and the lessons we can learn from those. Now, of course, it's absolutely natural and to be expected, isn't it, that AI is one of the tools, one of many tools that are being deployed in the global response, the global fight back against this virus. And it's natural, of course, that every tool that we can use has to be used to try to prevent the spread of the infection, to try and save lives, and of course, to try and prevent the damage and the economic impact that's happening around the world. And there are kind of broadly four areas, I think, where AI has been deployed in the big fight back against COVID-19. And I've named them here. So There is, of course, awful lot of work of the use of AI in diagnostics, looking at how to identify and triage infected patients. There's a lot of work of use of AI in treatment, and particularly looking at the development of therapeutics and antiviral drugs. A variety of uses of AI in terms of prevention measures, and also the use of AI in thinking about future protection, so development of vaccines, and also some of the kind of more broad, what we might call big data applications. So AI is being used in all of those areas, and I'm going to give you just a few examples of those applications. And I think it's very interesting to note as well, and I don't know if people on the call are aware, that a Canadian AI system called Blue Dot, which scans a whole range of sources of information, actually identified the COVID-19 outbreak 9 days before the World Health Organization made the announcement. And there's a strong argument that if a scanning system like Blue Dot had been used and had been taken notice of by not just the WHO, but a lot of authorities, the possibility would have been that we could have got ahead of the COVID-19 outbreak before it even started and actually contained it. And so that's a really interesting kind of thing to just think about. Future protection, as I mentioned before, is one of the areas where AI could be making a big contribution in the future, and potentially already made a contribution. So, maybe if we were taking AI seriously and using AI to help us around this whole kind of thing, not only with this pandemic, but in public health applications more broadly, maybe we'd be in a better position. But there's also definitely the case that as we've seen AI being rolled out in these various areas, we're seeing some concerns emerging, particularly around false expectations of AI and the overselling of the ability of AI. And I think part of that has been around the almost panic to say that we need things to help us, and maybe AI is going to solve the problem. And then when AI doesn't really solve all of the problems, then there's a potential for a backlash. And I think that's also an important thing to look at, and we'll cover that later. So I've picked out just a few headlines here of examples where you can see that, and these are kind of back from May and June, when things were really hotting up, certainly here in the UK, and the depth and the severity of the pandemic was becoming apparent to everyone. And what you start to see was a lot of talk about how AI would be part of the big solution. AI can help in the fight against COVID-19. It can track where the infection is going. It can improve healthcare decisions. It can be part of the big response to COVID-19. And the first area I've already mentioned is monitoring. So AI applications in monitoring. And that's looking at kind of what I would call big data models, the idea of these epidemiological models to be able to see where the infection is, where it's going to go next, allow the authorities in any country to be able to identify what's happening with the virus and the things they need to do, and be able to take a big data, a lot of data from the public health officials, but also from all sorts of other sources, and be able to say that we know where the virus is, we know where it's going, we can get ahead of it, we can implement containment measures and do things to make sure that we can track the virus in real time and then save lives. Obviously, that's a good thing to do. And one of the areas that where the application of AI in COVID-19 has been really, really kind of prevalent has been in diagnostics and triage. Now, for anyone who in the call who's working in AI, you'll know that one of the things that AI is pretty good at is what's called pattern recognition. And a lot of pattern recognition techniques in AI are looking at images and being able to identify images, training an AI to be able to recognize something in an image. That's a very, very powerful range of applications. There's all sorts of things and all sorts of different types of pattern recognition tools within the family of AI. And there's also many different types of application of pattern recognition. But in COVID-19, that's predominantly been about looking at images of the lungs of COVID patients or potential COVID patients. And those images would come from, for example, X-rays or CAT scans or other kinds of scans. And I've just shown you a couple of examples of here where being able to look at images and identify, number one, does this patient have COVID? Number two, if they do have COVID, how serious is it? And therefore, number three, what kind of treatment should they get? Now, that's fantastic, isn't it? The idea that we could train AI on a lot of images. And of course, again, anybody who knows how you work with AI, in order to make an AI effective, you have to train it with an awful lot of data. And that's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because in fact, a lot of these AI applications have been developed, and the ones you're looking at here have been developed by showing the AI images of the lungs of patients who are not COVID patients. They've got other lung conditions. And actually because of course early on, as the pandemic spread, there wasn't really a lot of data to work with. But nevertheless, the idea of saying, well, look, we can take AI, which has been trained, look at images of lungs, identify anomalies, see if we can understand those anomalies. And of course, as we get more patient data, improve the quality of the AI, improve how smart it is, how much it knows, its ability to recognize these images, and identify whether or not this patient has COVID. If they do have COVID, what level, if you like, what level of lung damage might they already have, or how much infection is in their lungs, and make a decision on how to treat them. Again, that's a great idea, isn't it? You know, the idea of being able to support the doctors with those kind of tools. One of the important things to recognize here is that in many places around the world, and certainly in Europe, in Italy in the early days of the pandemic, there were very distressing pictures coming from the Lombardy region of Italy, showing intensive care unit doctors completely overwhelmed by the number of patients and the severity of their infections, and sadly terrible loss of life. About half of all of the patients who went into ICU actually died. And of course, during the pandemic, we've seen an awful lot of discussion around health systems being overwhelmed. And here again in the UK, as we're very much entering the second wave of COVID-19, there's another kind of, whole wave of discussions on the healthcare systems, how to protect them, how to prevent them from being overwhelmed, surge hospitals being built and brought into operation. And during the first wave, certainly it was the case that around the world, as health systems suddenly had to deal with this surge of this unknown virus, many young and fairly inexperienced clinicians were being called into service. Even in some cases, medical students being brought into the health systems to give extra resource and extra capacity as all around the world were trying to deal with the virus and its effects. Now, that's an interesting thing just to kind of pause and reflect on, because the possibility is that what you've got is relatively inexperienced clinicians using AI as decision support tools, and the AI being in fact relatively inexperienced. And what I mean by that is the AI not having been trained on the COVID disease images, having been trained with something else, and not really knowing, not really having therefore learned the nature of the COVID disease and the nature of the images we're looking at. So you've got inexperienced clinicians using inexperienced AI for decision support. That's a really interesting kind of thing, and I'm going to return back to that. And certainly, as you can see here from the MIT Technology Review, that there's a strong feeling that these AI triage systems, not just for COVID-19, but probably even past COVID-19 into the future, these triage tools are here to stay. this will be the way that, certainly for lung disease, AI will be used to look at images like this in the future. And so I've already mentioned to you that less experienced clinicians being pressed into service and health systems being overwhelmed, triage decisions needing to be made by AI systems, or at least with AI systems as a key mechanism of decision support. And of course, we know that those triage decisions are effectively life and death decisions, or could be life and death decisions for individual patients. And that patient could be you, or your mother, or your father, or your brother, or your sister, or your son, or your daughter. And the idea that an inexperienced doctor would be using AI, which is in fact relatively inexperienced, to make a life and death decision on you or a member of your family, that's a really profound kind of concept, isn't it? And I've just given you a few examples of the type of systems which are in use. So Cure AI, eCart, Epic, these are all systems being used now for decision support for clinicians making decisions on the diagnostics and triage of COVID patients. Now, we also know that, of course, accelerating drug discovery and development for therapeutic purposes is a great thing to do. And I myself have been involved in a variety of projects which have been around drug discovery and development, what's called in silico drug discovery, the idea of creating computer-based models and looking at how molecules will act in the body before you ever put them into tissue, and being able to run millions of computer-based trials to see which drugs might be more effective, and then pick the best candidates and take those into trials. Massively accelerates drug discovery and development. And AI has been used not only for COVID, but of course, indeed, as a tool for many other areas of drug discovery and development. And you can see here some examples of that. But you can also see there are some examples where specifically where AI has been used to develop the therapeutic drugs to try and help patients who've been infected with COVID. And of course, that's very important. And without any question, the idea of accelerating therapeutic drug development and therapies in general to make sure that the fatality rate goes down, and also the long-term effects. And people are now talking about what's called long COVID, the idea that you don't die, but you end up with long-term health effects as a result of the impact of the infection in your lungs and indeed in other parts of the body. So mitigating those effects and being able to very, very quickly develop drugs is, of course, a good thing. That's a good thing, isn't it? We'd all, I think, agree with that any tools which help us to develop drugs as quickly as we possibly can to help people who have become infected and therefore, again, mitigate the effect of COVID-19, that's a good thing to do. Got to be a good thing to do. And in terms of healthcare decision-making, these, as you can see in this kind of flow chart, these point these arrows and the flow of patients through healthcare systems show you where there are all very critical decisions. So coming in at the left side of this diagram, patients who are unwell, how unwell are they? Is it COVID? Is it not COVID? Of course, here in the UK, we're just entering the period when other coronaviruses and indeed other viruses are respiratory viruses are circulating in the population. So someone might show up with symptoms which are flu or indeed other kinds of disease, not COVID, but the symptoms early on might look very similar. So trying to identify somebody a COVID, not COVID patient. If they are a COVID patient, do they need to come into hospital? And that's a very important decision when healthcare systems are under so much pressure. Do they need to go into intensive care? If they do go into intensive care, what kind of treatment do they need? Do they need to be on a ventilator? How long do they need to be on a ventilator? When is it safe for them to be discharged out of intensive care back into general wards? And indeed, when can they go back home? these are all critical decisions in terms of the individual patient and the broader population. And every one of those is an area which is effectively decision based on risk. So the idea of probabilities and risk of the decision that a doctor makes. And AI is being used in many regards to look at these decisions, taking all the factors into account, and AI systems have been trained to look at the data, either the individual patient data, and taking that into context with the broader issues of the resources available and what's happening in the population, to identify personalized levels of risk. This very, very idea of personalized medical care, and AI being the key decision support tool that the doctors use to identify the levels of risk, so that for an individual patient, is your risk 30% or is it 1% or 15%, as you see here? And then also where the optimization of the resources, how to optimize resources, not just for the individual patient, for the whole population. And in all of those cases, AI is already being used. And indeed, there start to be conversations about whether or not AI would be the tool, the key silver bullet for what's referred to as extreme personalization. The idea that AI systems, a combination of the kind of triaging that you've seen, looking at lung images, looking at other data, and the ability to make these risk decisions for individuals that would in fact be the tool to get society out of lockdown. That was beginning to be talked about in May and June. And this quote, I think, is quite profound. AI offers huge potential to support agile clinical decision-making, ensuring patients receive the most appropriate support and leading to better patient outcomes. And that word agile, what that really means is fast and efficient. Fast and efficient decision-making, right at the point of presence, to be able to make decisions about you or your family, and those decisions being potentially life and death. Now, of course, we all understand that, you know, the pandemic did get out of control, and it's now all over the world. And what we're seeing is a whole plethora of track and trace systems, various kind of systems being used to identify who's got the virus, who they've been in contact with, being able to trace their contacts, with the idea of being able to find people who've got the infection or at risk of getting the infection, and getting them to isolate and therefore contain the spread of the disease. And a lot of those applications, some of the technology is not AI, but there are embedded components of AI within them, which are about looking at big data and also kind of bringing that back into the epidemiological models. And so track and trace is now kind of, you know, endemic across the world. There's a track and trace system here now. There's an application, phone app in the UK. There's, you know, apps everywhere else. You've seen that, I think in Germany, when the track and trace application in Germany was released, in one single day, it was downloaded 12 million times. So we're talking about tens, hundreds of millions of individual applications and the use of technology based on AI to look at the flow of population, identify where the virus is, and use this technology, which has got AI embedded in it, as a mechanism of containing and controlling the spread of the virus. And you can see they're all over the world. These are just the European applications. So what I've just described there is an awful lot of what looks at face value like really positive uses of AI. You know, the ability to maybe having identified from the public health data a pandemic outbreak in the future that before it even gets out of control and contain it would be, of course, a good thing. The ability to use AI for the big epidemiological models to understand how a virus and a disease can spread and is likely to spread, and being able to get ahead of that. At the level of individual patients, being able to help doctors make good clinical decisions and therefore get better patient outcomes, to deal with the risks and optimization of all of the health resources, to do all the track and trace stuff, to make sure that we've got control over infection spread. They all, are I think, very, very good examples of where AI can make a positive difference in the global fight against a pandemic like COVID-19. But I think we have to ask the question, that all sounds great, but is there a downside? And if so, what is it? And I mentioned at the start of the presentation that one of the risks is the danger of unrealistic expectations. I think we all recognize that there was a period, certainly for here in the UK, that period was probably around April and May, when the severity of the pandemic and the impact it was going to have on people's lives was really becoming apparent. And for the public, but I think also the public health and the government authorities, there was this sense of, wow, what on earth can we do? And any tool that can help us, we need to kind of deploy. And we saw that quote about the idea of extreme personalization being, potentially the silver bullet. And I think what happened there, in the almost panic to find a solution to COVID-19, some unrealistic expectations specifically of how effective AI could be as part of the answer, or indeed the answer to COVID-19, became an issue. And then what's happened as a result of that is there's been a fairly obvious pushback. And so you can see from these headlines, starting to see the kind of, the move in the other direction. AI isn't going to be the big silver bullet, isn't going to be the solution. And in fact, some of that pushback isn't just about AI in COVID-19. It's about kind of saying, AI is an overhyped industry that's being oversold, and that, can't work miracles, and you can't expect AI to be the solution. And I believe that what's happened is there's been an overselling of AI, not in terms of what AI can do, but what AI could potentially do in COVID-19 as part of this kind of panic response. And as a result of that, I think that those who've done that, sometimes for very, very short-term commercial gain, they've seen an opportunity to upsell a product, perhaps overhype that product, and then take short-term gain, but not realize that they're doing damage not only to themselves but also to the broad field of AI in terms of confidence in AI, perhaps on a much longer scale. And so I do think that there are questions to be asked around some companies in the corporate sector who've used this approach of overhyping AI, and they've kind of overpromised and under-delivered, and that's damaged confidence not just in their product but AI in general. And I also think that one of the key things when we talk about AI, and particularly when we're looking at use of AI with big data science models, building predictive models which need big data. To make them robust, they need an awful lot of data. Building such models without sufficient data, in other words, you don't have a past history of COVID-19, so you've got other standard epidemiological models, and the data for COVID-19 didn't quite fit it. That meant that what certainly here in the UK happened was these big data models weren't really quite fit for purpose. And as a result of that, decisions were made which are really quite profound around liberty and the economy and society, which have been found in retrospect not to be very good decisions. That conversation is happening again now here in the UK about what's going to happen in the next wave of COVID-19. But at least now the models have more data to work with, so the models are becoming more robust. But it does highlight this issue of making big, profound decisions on public health, or the economy, or society, using models which actually are built with relatively sparse data, and therefore those models aren't a good representation of the problem that you're applying them to. And that's a flaw in some applications of AI, not just in COVID. And then there's something I really want to kind of explore in this part of the talk, which is the danger of ignoring ethical concerns. There are real concerns, I think, about not just in COVID, but as we'll see in kind of where AI is going generally, about the how the AI is used and what the ethical considerations are around how the normal mechanism of developing AI systems, and indeed software in general, because of the race to get solutions and the race to deal with COVID, have meant that the normal things we would look at in terms of the ethical impacts of products that we're developing and systems that we're developing, and the constraints and regulations around those, have been either removed completely or they've just been ignored. Now, an example of that in the UK has been a big conversation about privacy and personal data in the track and trace systems. And it's certainly true that in the early versions of those systems, there were real flaws, which in fact led to the first versions of track and trace being abandoned. And there is, I think, a concern about whether or not that the software, which is now on millions and millions of mobile phones, is a technology which is kind of a genie out of a bottle. Now that it's out there, it'll be very difficult to put it back. It's been deployed for COVID-19, but it will still be there post COVID-19. And how would it be used? And what are the safety measures to ensure that it can't be used inappropriately? It's a very powerful technology, you know, sitting in the pockets of almost every person in the country and indeed around the world. How will that technology be used? Because the AI knows an awful lot about you. It knows an awful lot about where you go, who you're with, what you do, and it knows an awful lot about the way you live your life. And how is that then going to be used post-COVID? Are there appropriately robust, what I refer to as sunset clauses in the use of these systems? A lot of questions to be asked. So these are real concerns, I think. And there are those that think this is so serious that the risk of what's happening with AI being used in tracking and surveillance in COVID-19 actually far outweighs the rewards that we're getting in using that technology in the fight against COVID-19. And you can see here, Ayanna Howard and Jason Borenstein, making some comment in their article back from May saying there are things around what's happening with AI replacing particular kinds of roles, but also the track and trace systems. What happens when that's become entrenched practice and we can't walk it back? In other words, the genie out of the bottle argument. So all of that was, I wanted to use COVID-19 as a kind of very clear and present example of some of the issues around the development and use of AI, and then start to think about the future. What is absolutely true is that AI is booming. We are in a period, an absolute boom period of AI. And whether or not you know it, AI is already all around you every day. You interact with AI all the time without even knowing it. And the global growth of AI is evidenced not least by the amount of commercial investment that's going into AI. And I've just picked out a few statistics here. The AI software market will reach 126 billion in revenue by 2025. The market in North America around predictive software to reach 53 billion. And what's interesting is as we mentioned it in the beginning of the presentation, I've been editor-in-chief, so I've been working in applied AI for 30 years. And I've been editor-in-chief of a journal published by Springer called Neural Computing Applications since 1996. And Neural Computing Applications started off as a journal back in the early 90s as part of an organization called the Neural Computing Applications Forum here in the UK. So it was very much a UK only thing. And it was about showing industry that neural networks, which is really just one form of AI, had practical uses and could be a real tool to solve real problems in the real world. It wasn't just a kind of clever academic kind of trick of mathematics. And the journal through the 1990s stayed as being a very UK industry forum, kind of, you know, the bridge between academia and industry, that kind of thing. But as you can see from this graph, from the early 2000s, things started to change. And once they started to change, boy, did they change. So having gone from publishing maybe a few dozen papers per year in the 1990s, NCA now receives, and this year will receive close to 4,000 submissions from academic scientists and engineers all over the world. And the breadth of the type of applications and the breadth of the different technologies in AI is incredible. The spread of the use of AI and the different types of technology within AI is absolutely incredible. And it really is exponential growth. So we're seeing a huge boom in the commercialization, the productization and commercialization of AI, and indeed the monetization of AI. And we're seeing a huge growth in the academic, scientific and engineering R&D in AI and neural computing applications, which is a great journal. And if you're working in this field, please have a look, and we'd be delighted to receive your work too. It's a very good journal publishing very high quality work on applied AI. But it gives me a vantage point to be able to see what's happening in AI, and the boom is absolutely incredible. So the risks, that, you know, this great boom, fantastic, isn't it wonderful? I'm very pleased my journal is doing very well. And of course, we're seeing this huge expansion of AI, and it's great. There are many positive things around that. There are great new jobs being created in AI. I should say, by the way, in that commercialization, interestingly, the Asia Pacific region is by far the leader in that commercial development. So you guys in Hong Kong, you're where it's at. You're in the region which is right now is the absolute epicenter of the boom in AI. But there is a question about the risks. So it's fantastic that AI is booming. There are a lot of positives in that, but obviously there are also risks. Question: what are they? And as AI develops in its capability and power, I think there are very, very significant questions around which emerge around how AI is being used, what it can be used for, which is much, much more profound than when I did my early work in the 1990s, and the potential for not only accidental misuse or errors in the way AI is being used, but even deliberate misuse, I think, is increasing exponentially, along with the exponential growth in the R&D and in the commercialization. And there are increasing numbers of examples where AI has been used in ways which give us rise to pretty difficult ethical and moral questions. I picked out just two here. So Cambridge Analytica was a company based here in the UK that was working with Facebook, and they were doing an awful lot of data capture and modeling of individuals on Facebook and what they do. So using all of the background data from the social media platform to profile you in a very, very detailed way. And that led them to effectively use AI in ways which are designed to manipulate your behavior. Now, that started out as being manipulation of individual behavior for commercial and consumer purposes. In other words, identify what you like, what you're interested in, who you talk to, profile all of that, and then effectively target you with marketing campaigns to give you information which you're much more likely to be interested in, and therefore you're much more likely to buy products. But very quickly that became something else. And what this something else became was the ability to profile you and identify the kind of things you're interested in, the kind of things you like, and profile you such that other kinds of information could be targeted at you to give you information which you're much more likely to accept. And what that really means is the possibility of giving you misinformation, which is really just a polite word for a lie. In other words, tell you lies, but target those lies because you'd be much more likely to believe them. And that became a very, very serious issue. And of course, we're not only are we dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course the United States election is coming up, in a very short period of time, and we're in that kind of campaign now. But there's a strong argument that things that Cambridge Analytica were doing and the technology was being used to target people and give them misinformation, which influenced the result of the 2016 US election very significantly. And there's also some argument that similar techniques were used to influence the EU referendum here in the UK. And so that big parts of the democratic process have been influenced by the deliberate, and I would argue deliberately unethical use of AI. Excuse me. And I've also picked out another example here, a company called Clearview AI. Clearview is a company in the United States, a tech startup that scraped 6 billion images from social media to create a training database to train facial recognition systems. And then that product was sold to police forces, and I think 60 police forces in the US were using it, and other investigative agencies. And two things happened when the Clearview system was really kind of suddenly getting a lot of attention. One was that the idea of images which are put on social media being taken without permission and being used in the training database caused a lot of concern about the ethical basis of using people's images without express permission. But the second is that the labeling of the training data revealed that there was in fact racial bias inherent in the data. And what that meant was it was exposed that the use of the system potentially unfairly targeted particular ethnic groups as being much more likely to be identified by the facial recognition systems, and therefore those groups being much more likely to be included as persons of interest in investigative processes. When that was all revealed, and I was watching with almost horror back in February and March, the result of that was about half of the police forces dropped the product within a week or two. And the backlash was so profound that IBM and Google also decided that they would no longer allow their face recognition systems to be used by investigative agencies. So there's already been a significant backlash against these, I'd say, inappropriate or unethical uses of AI. And I think that's an interesting thing, thinking about kind of the idea of ethics by design and the role of the AI ethicist. I want to talk about that. A lot of people talk about explainable AI. One of the dangers of AI is that you develop an AI system, you train it on data, and then you give it new data that it hasn't seen before during the training process, and it gives you a result. But you don't really know how it did that. You don't really know what happened inside the AI to be able to give you the result. And so there's a lot of work on what's called explainable AI to say, well, what we'll do is we'll make the AI system more transparent so that you can see that based on whatever the input was, you can see how you got the output. Now that's a good thing, but ethical AI is an awful lot more than explainable AI. Because you can explain how the Clearview system works. One can see that, but that doesn't make it ethical. You can see how the Cambridge Analytica system works, but that doesn't make it ethical. And I would argue that the idea of building ethics into the design of AI systems is extremely important, not just making them explainable afterwards, but actually making sure that the ethical questions are being addressed as part of the design process. And as I mentioned earlier on, because of the rush to develop systems in the battle against COVID, some of these approaches that probably should be taken weren't taken, and that's why we're now seeing some of the pushback on those applications of AI in COVID, because in fact there are questionable consequences for some of those applications. And I certainly think that the idea of building AI, building ethics into the development process of AI requires someone to have the functional role, the responsibility for ethics in the development process. And so with some of the editorial board of my new journal, there's a real kind of push for developing the functional role of the AI ethicist to be part of the development team for developing AI, because the Clearview AI system, I think, and the situation there really amply shows you that it's very hard to bolt ethics on afterwards. Having built a system with 6 billion images and labeled in particular ways, it's very difficult for Clearview to go back and say, oh, we now see that we got that wrong and we'll rectify it. It's very hard to do. It's much better to build ethics in from the start. And having the functional role of the AI ethicist as part of the development team, I think, is a great way forward. Now, there is also a big debate going on about whether or not AI, which is now all around us, I mentioned right at the beginning, it's booming. And as I mentioned, because of my other journal, Neurocomputing Applications, see so much in terms of the breadth of the types of applications in every sector and the power of the technology. The debate then becomes, has AI now got to the point where we need specific laws to regulate and manage the risk around AI? And there's an awful lot of work being done around the world. European Commission has now a whole program on developing trust in AI and the kind of governance frameworks. Here in the UK, the House of Lords has a select committee on AI, and a good friend of mine, Lord David Putnam, is a member of that committee. And indeed, the White House has also had a similar thing. And there are many other examples in Australia, all around the world. And I think certainly it's my view that it's possible that AI has reached it or even passed a tipping point. And that tipping point is not unlike what was happening in genetic science maybe 20 or 25 years ago. People will be aware that 20, 25, 30 years ago, the power of genetics was getting to the point where it allowed the possibility of doing certain things around human embryology, genetic editing, which caused there to be a need for debate in genetic science around the question of the power of the technology that allows you to do things, but whether or not you should do those things. And I believe that's exactly where AI is now. I think AI has developed the power and capability to do amazing things and amazing things in very positive ways. you know, and I'm a positive advocate for AI. But the fact that you've got the power to do something doesn't mean to say that you should do it. And I think AI has reached the point where we have to have that debate. And if you wanted to learn about what's these issues in AI, if you're not familiar with them, then there is a documentary movie made by a lady called Leanne Pooley, who lives in New Zealand, a movie called We Need to Talk About AI. And this is one of the promo images for that movie. It's about a 90-minute documentary. It's really excellent. A friend of mine, David Malone, helped to make that movie. And I think watching that movie would really help you to understand a lot of these big questions about the future of AI and these big moral and ethical questions in terms of what the future of AI might hold. Now, I think what's very, very positive is that a lot of big corporations and companies are now committing to the development of ethical AI. And I've just picked out one example. So this is BMW. And BMW recently, just in the last couple of weeks, published their new code of ethics for the development of AI. And if you look at the things identified on this image, these really are the big things around the future of AI. The idea of diversity and non-discrimination and fairness, looking at development of AI, which brings environmental and societal benefits, that AI that is accountable, is transparent, deals with the issues of privacy, is technically robust and safe, and where there is always human agency and oversight. I think that's a very, very good, simple framework for the development of ethical AI for the future. So, as mentioned in the introduction, I've been thinking about these issues of AI and ethics for some time, over the last few years. But I took the opportunity with my great friend and colleague, Larry Metzger, who's a professor of AI at George Washington University in the States, this year to establish a new journal for AI and ethics. And there's a little bit of a description around it. What we're hoping to do through this journal is to be an agent for good in creating the opportunity for people to publish their work and also for people to use what we publish around these big issues in ethics in AI and where the future of AI is going and the need for that future to be based on ethical AI. And we published our first material. I'm delighted to say it's been quite a journey, but we published our first material last week. And I've just picked out a few examples of the papers that we've published. And these are very, very high quality, real leading thought leadership pieces on the future of AI. And these are just 3 that I've picked out to put on a slide to show you the kind of stuff we're publishing. So please go and have a look at that journal, have a look at the material that we're publishing, and you'll learn a lot about the issues of AI and ethics. So what do you need to think about if you want to build ethical AI? Well, as I said, ethical AI is much more than explainable AI because it has to be trustworthy. You have to make sure that you're building systems which people can trust. And the implication is they need to be able to trust the AI, which means they need to be able to trust you. You need to make sure that you're eliminating as far as possible the issues of bias in AI. A lot of people who aren't familiar with AI don't realize that AI is intelligent insofar as it learns from data. Of course, we learn from our experiences. But we also know that humans do develop biases, but develop prejudices. And of course, if all we do is present those prejudices and biases in the data we train AI with, then what we'll do is train bias into AI. So we have to be very careful, and the Clearview AI example is a good one, I think, of making sure that we don't build bias into the AI. We have to make sure that we're building accountability for the impact of the AI into our overall systems. And we have to make sure that there is human agency and oversight of AI. And I have to say that's not always apparent. I'll give you an example. One of the papers that I just showed you there that we published last week is from a guy called David Lauer. David's based in New Jersey and he works in the financial sector. there is, for a long time now, high volume, high speed financial trading has been done by AI because it can't be done fast enough by humans. But now there is AI that's been built deliberately to influence the AI that's doing the trading. Now, in both of those systems, where is the human? Where's the human oversight? AI that is learning to influence other AI at a speed which cannot involve human intervention, I think has to be a concern. That's financial sector, but what happens if that moves onto the battlefield? What happens if that's the future of human warfare? That decisions have to be made so fast that humans can't make them, so the AI makes them. And that's how you get to the Terminator movies and the other kind of, Hollywood films that have shown us a dystopian future of AI. So human oversight and human agency is not always apparent, and I think it's a really important issue. This isn't my quote, but I like it. This actually is from Dame Wendy Hall, who's a leading computer scientist here in the UK. But one thing you should remember, AI really is an algorithm, and algorithms are just opinions embedded in software. And I think that's a good takeaway line. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening, and I'd be very happy to take any questions.
So for the first question, Professor, I want to ask is whether you think AI can become the moral subjects like human beings, and what are the conditions required to become such a moral subject?
Sure. So the question is whether or not AI will become moral.
Yes.
I think if I understand that correctly, the question very much speaks to understanding what morality means.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is about consciousness.
Yeah.
And so that's a big philosophical debate about, there are two different things. One is, can AI become as intelligent as humans? That very much depends on your understanding of intelligence. And it's certainly true that at the moment what we have is generally referred to as narrow AI. And what we mean by that is AI which is developed for a particular problem. So in the examples I gave you around COVID, those systems are very, very good at or have learned the nature of a particular problem, but they don't know anything about anything else. You can't take the AI which has been used to look at images of lungs in COVID and use them for another purpose because they don't know anything about the other purposes. That's not how they work. It's not what they've been developed for. So they may be very, very good and indeed better than humans once they're trained on very good data at being able to recognize patterns in images or, the application, whichever the AIs for it's been developed. They might be actually better than humans at a narrow task, but they have no intelligence outside of that task. And so that's referred to as narrow AI. The idea of developing artificial intelligence, which, like we are able to apply our reasoning capabilities to the wide world, that's referred to as artificial general intelligence. And at the moment, we're a very, very long way from artificial general intelligence. Now, it's a related but different issue to the question of morality. And morality kind of starts to go into the philosophical debate about consciousness. And it's very hard to say whether or not artificial general intelligence will ever emerge. And indeed, if that artificial general intelligence will lead to artificial consciousness, and from that morality is a big, big, big philosophical debate. I think the likelihood is that AGI, as it's referred to, artificial general intelligence, if it does emerge, is a very long way away. Maybe hundreds of years. If you watch the movie I mentioned in the talk, which is called "We Need to Talk About AI," there are many leading thinkers in AI who kind of give different answers to these questions around will AGI emerge, and if it does, how long will it be? Some people say, hey, it could happen in the next 20 years. My own feeling is it's further away than that. And even then, AGI and the idea of consciousness and morality are two different things. So I hope that's something of an answer to that question. There was another question, I think, about so there's a question about, do we develop explainable AI first or develop ethical AI directly? And the answer is very much the latter. So developing explainable AI, as I mentioned, you can build, transparency is one part of an ethical framework for AI, but it's not the only part. And you saw, for example, on that image of around the BMW group and their code of ethics, transparency, which brings kind of explainability, is only one part of all of the components that you need. Clearview AI, as an example, you could build that as explainable AI, but it still wouldn't be ethical. The explainability and transparency helps to lead towards ethical AI, but it doesn't get you all of the way there. And so I would certainly commend that what we should be doing is building ethical AI directly. Next question I can see is AI safe? And will AI be biased after learning corresponding capabilities from human creators? Well, so those are two different questions, but I'll answer them. That quote that I gave you at the end, an algorithm is just an opinion embedded in software. What that really means is this. It's humans who write the algorithms which develop AI. The AI then learns from the data we provided. And there are two possible areas which bring in the potential for the lack of fairness or bias. So one is the mechanisms by which we write the algorithms provides us with the embedding bias. I don't know what that image is. I don't know where that's coming from. The algorithm could potentially be biased because it's built by humans, and the possibility of the humans kind of unconsciously building their bias into the algorithm. And then there's the data with which we train the AI. And that certainly, from the Clearview example, is what went wrong. So the data was inherently biased, which meant the AI became biased. So the issue of bias in that question is to do with building ethical frameworks and governance will help us to avoid that problem. Question, is AI safe? And that depends on what the application is and how it's being built. But certainly there are risks in the possibility of developing AI, particularly if AI has been built without these kind of ethical and governance frameworks that take into account what the potential harms are and then how you avoid them. The question about AI and if AI makes a mistake with serious consequences, who's responsible? Is it the government or the company? Well, it very much depends who developed the AI. But most likely it would be whoever developed and applied the AI. So that would probably be a company rather than governments. Good question in that. And again, if I would commend you to have a look at the movie where you need to talk about AI, would be the development of AI in autonomous vehicles. So self-driving cars. There's a big conversation in AI about the philosophical problem, what's called the trolley problem, which is you've got a self-driving vehicle, the AI is taking all of the kind of data from sensors, and then a woman pushing a baby in a trolley walks in front of the car. And now the AI has to make a decision because it's either going to kill the woman and the baby, or to avoid the woman and the baby, it has to crash the car and kill the driver. Which decision does it make? That's a really hard problem, isn't it? Not least because if you know that the system has been built to save the woman and the baby, but who would buy that car? Who would buy the car that's got the AI that knows is going to sacrifice the driver? So very, very significant questions, I think. The next question, AI is everywhere in our lives. What do you think of the future AI? And will AI become a necessity for people in the future? Certainly AI is all around us. The future of AI is becoming even more ubiquitous, so AI will become more and more prevalent. It's already partly a necessity in as much as it's being used in ways that you don't even know. AI is being used on your mobile phone. The face recognition systems on your phone, the security on your phone is AI based. Believe it or not, AI is now in phones, cameras, washing machines, TVs, laptops, banking systems, social media systems. It's everywhere. So the next question was, Dan Ding says, may I ask how to deal with the unknown relationships in data mining? Well, of course, one of the very, very powerful applications of AI is in data mining, and it's to explore where those latent relationships in data are. So dealing with unknown relationships and actually finding them, so they are unknown relationships, we find that there's patterns in data, and using AI to find those patterns and then learn from what the patterns are is a very, very powerful part of what we can do with AI. And the next question is, do you think the world needs too many teenagers before the world can achieve the prosperity of artificial intelligence? No, I'm not so sure that we need too many teenagers. I think it's certainly the case that AI is being applied in all sorts of ways that are impacting on the population of the world of all ages, of all types, of all nations, of all ethnicities. So I think, no, I don't think it's just about teenagers. The next question is about the future development trend of moral artificial intelligence. Certainly, I think if I use the term ethical intelligence, that I think is very much what I hope is the future of AI. There's always going to be bad actors, like the person who's just been sharing those images, trying to spoil things for other people. There are always going to be bad actors and those who would do bad things with whichever tools, whether it's AI or anything else. But I think that what we're seeing, and I gave you the example of BMW, is that there are more and more people involved in the development of AI who recognize these risks and are now putting their own corporate programs together to make sure that the AI that they're developing is ethical AI and AI for good. And also those much bigger discussions around AI happening at the government level, and indeed at groups of nations like the EU. So the development of good governance frameworks, sets of principles, and codes of practice, which are helping to make sure that the future of AI will be based around ethical AI, I think is a good development. So the next question is interested in the relation between the concepts of bias and the concepts of ethics. Is a concept of bias prior to the concept of ethics? It's not necessarily the other way around, but they have a relationship in the sense that bias is unethical. If it's to do with bias creates unfairness or disadvantage, then it's unethical. And the questions of ensuring that avoiding biases in the development and application of AI, which lead to unfairness, I think that's the issue of understanding the ethical question. Question about asking the field of AI protection of user information. So certainly there's been a lot of work being done on broadly cyber security and data protection. And AI is one of the tools. It's not the only tool, but one of the tools which is now being used very effectively to help with cybersecurity and data protection. Very much linked to encryption. So yes, a Zoom bomb indeed, very unpleasant that was. So other than diagnosis, triage, decision making, other measures AI can practically help in the prevention and the spread of COVID-19. I think those are probably the main areas of application. So I think the big epidemiological models, which are big data models, as those models now become more populated with better data, those models are going to become better at understanding where COVID-19 is and how it can be contained, which containment measures are most effective. And the other area, of course, is the development of therapeutics, and AI is, as we saw, helping very much in the development of drugs which are going to help COVID patients. I think eventually we'll get vaccines, and hopefully we'll all be looking back at COVID-19 as a thing of the past. These terrible diseases which were ravages on humanity effectively were removed by the development of vaccines. And I think AI certainly has a role to play in helping us to develop effective vaccines quickly. The question about moral artificial intelligence is an inevitable trend in the future. I think I go back to the question, the answer I gave earlier, which is that's to do with really the question of morality comes from consciousness. And consciousness arguably comes from the ability to develop general intelligence. And artificial general intelligence is a long way away. So is it an inevitable trend? I think if you mean ethical intelligence as a process of design, then I think that's a very important part of the future trend of AI. And it's certainly why Larry and I set up the Journal of AI and Ethics to promote the idea that the development of AI for the future should be based on ethical AI. The question about the boom period of artificial intelligence, will it be a crisis for people's work and lives? If I understand the question, I think it's about whether AI and the development of AI will create a crisis. Certainly, there is no doubt that the development of any technology in human history has created what you might call a disruption of aspects of society. And that includes the potential for the work that people do to be changed or even replaced, and for their lives to be impacted by the technology. If you look at the development of electricity, there were people whose jobs, whose livelihoods were dependent on the way life was before electricity. And then when electricity was invented and developed, that technology changed their lives, and in some cases, their jobs and work was replaced and lost. And one of the big issues is that as you get those disruptions, new jobs, new technology, new products and services and ideas emerge from the technology, which create new jobs. But it's not always the people who lost the old jobs who are the people who take the new jobs. And that's always a moral dilemma as technology disrupts society. It's happened in every technological revolution through human history. And that will be true of AI. So there will be some people who will be the people who are disadvantaged as their jobs are changed or lost. But there will be more new jobs created. And I believe there'll be a net advantage to society, but there will definitely be some losers, some winners and losers, definitely. Next question is about AI developing comprehensively. So will there be many people whose positions will replace? Well, that's very much what I've just been talking about. Yes, and so that idea of AI will replace some of the things that some people do in their work now, but new jobs will be created. So the next question was about talking about AI and ethics, about legal and the law for use of AI for weapons. Weaponization of AI, I think, is a very, very, very serious issue. And it is already the case that the development of autonomous weapons and the use of, as I mentioned before, the use of AI in war is a big concern for everyone. I think it's absolutely the need to develop very, very strong ethical governance and legal frameworks to control that development. So, yeah, for sure. Excuse me. So how AI will transform the economy? Well, we're already seeing the development of many products based on AI. As I mentioned, this huge investment in AI, and so there's a lot of development projects, and that means that companies are investing in AI, and that's creating wealth and creating jobs, and so that's a positive thing. I think the impact of AI in particular sectors is profound. So we're seeing how AI is transforming manufacturing, making society more efficient, being more productive. I think what we're also seeing is very, very positive benefits of AI applications on the environment. And so there are many positives, but I think the economies will be disrupted by AI, and that there are certainly some sectors which will be radically affected. Financial technology is a good example, and banking. So I think what we'll see is the disruption of sectors, new jobs being created, but some jobs being lost. There being a net advantage to that, so more jobs being created than the jobs will be lost. And probably those jobs will be more technology jobs, so they're higher quality, better paying jobs, so net advantages. Can I share the slides? Yes, of course, and I think Rita's already got them. The knowledge learned by neural networks is definitely difficult for humans to understand. Is there any mechanism to help and interpret the network input and output? Yes. So that's where this idea of explainable AI and transparent AI comes in, and there are a variety of mechanisms for doing that. Neural networks are effectively a mathematical model of a mapping of input and output, as you quite rightly said, but there's mechanisms to kind of show what those mappings are and which are the greater influences in the weightings of the neural network connections. Next question, AI for analyzing material properties and how? By material properties, do you mean in material science? Is that the question?
Material science?
So the question is from ICFAI University in India. Can we use AI for analyzing material properties? Not quite sure what the question means, but I think it might be around looking at material science. So if it's material characterization, which is broadly a pattern recognition question, then yes.
So it's kind of like classification stuff.
Yeah, there are already applications of that.
Yeah.
So the next question is around, will it have a greater impact on medical care? Without question. Without any question, and particularly the idea of personalization. So AI leading to much more targeted healthcare, targeted to the individual. And so that will be in part about mapping specific treatments to patients, but also about the use of AI in optimizing health systems overall. So yes, without any question whatsoever. Do I think that the development of AI will pose a threat to user privacy? There are risks, not specifically from AI, but in general, actually, no, that's not true. There are risks from AI in terms of AI being used as a kind of hacking tool and for decryption purposes. And so, yes, there is a risk, but there's a lot of work being done on that to combat that using AI. So it's kind of both sides of the problem, both as a threat but also as a defense. So AI is certainly being used. Next question is, how does AI will be in the future and how will it be built? I think that's really the questions that I'm answering now around. I think AI should be built as ethical AI for the future to make sure that it's being built for the good of society and avoid some of these harms. So the next question is, if bias is intrinsically unethical and elimination of bias is or demanding, is there a hope that AI can be truly ethical? That's a very good question. I think the answer lies in the development of really robust ethical and governance frameworks and the development of transparency. So not just explainability, but transparency and the idea of building trust. So I think the answer is about developing really robust governance frameworks and regulatory frameworks to help us to eliminate as much of those biases and therefore the harm and the unfairness that could emerge from AI. I think that's what the future looks like from my point of view. There is so the question about cultural aspects of ethics is a very, very good one, and thanks for that question. We've worked very hard on our editorial board of AI and ethics to create a very, very diverse, culturally, ethnically, geographically, intellectually diverse board. And it's very a good question about kind of whose ethics do we apply, because there are different views of ethics. I think in these the work that I mentioned in the presentation, which is the work that's being done here in the UK, in the US, in the EU, and in other places, these kind of ideas of sets of principles which might turn into governance frameworks, which might turn into law, will be contextualized for the country or the culture from which they come. But there are some more broad level standards being developed. And a good one to look at the moment, this is all work in progress, of course, but a good one to look at the moment is the IEEE. So the IEEE is developing sets of international standards for the development of ethical AI. A guy called John Havers is leading that work. I know John, and I think that's very good work. It's worth having a look at that. So how do we ensure a balance between people losing jobs and the surge in disruptive technologies? That's a pretty difficult thing. It's hard to engineer the balance. That's one of the reasons why in all of these kind of pieces of work, we've been looking at the impact of AI, questions around how do you develop AI for the general good of society, includes this question of what will happen in the disruption of economies. That disruption will happen, inevitably it will happen, and there will be winners and losers. But I think the development of good ethical AI and the productization of AI in positive ways will create net advantages. And so just like all of these other technological revolutions through history, there will be more positives and negatives, but there will be definite impacts which would need to be dealt with by the society where those impacts are felt the most. Do I think AI will create mass unemployment amongst those who are not that much skillful? So what, and do you think it'll be survival of the fittest? That's a good question as well. I think, so no, not necessarily. I think not necessarily mass unemployment. I think there are interestingly questions around AI being applied in areas which are more white collar than blue collar. So automation has already had a big effect on kind of blue collar work. But for example, one of the areas where AI is now having significant effects in the area of accountancy. So my best friend is an accountant, and I like to tease him by telling him that he's going to be replaced by AI. He's not going to be replaced by AI, but some of the work that he does currently manually as an accountant will be assisted by AI. So the work will change. So no, I don't think mass unemployment, but although I do think there are areas where elements of AI will impact work in a significant way, and work will change, and there will be some job losses, but I think there'll be also a lot of creation of new jobs, which will be good, high quality technology jobs. Some countries considering taxes on the use of robotics and AI. I'm not sure that I want to get into questions about tax policies. I think certainly the idea of the mechanism, the use of technology and how it fits in the economic system of a particular country, I think is something that everyone's wrestling with. Certainly, I think that I like the idea of creating as a person committed to education, the idea of retraining and reskilling people to take advantage of the new technologies. I think that's a very good thing, and we should that we should promote. Good performance in classification to deal with verification errors. That is about the robustness of AI. So if you go back to the BMW image, the BMW framework, it talks about the technical robustness and safety of AI systems, and there are many ways that you can deal with the development of the training data and verification data to make sure that the AI that you develop is robust. And there are lots of really good examples and lots of good texts out there to explain how to go about doing that. I'll just say again a little bit about the journals. The journal AI and Ethics, as I mentioned, we established this new journal this year, myself and Larry Metzger, who's with George Washington, US. And then we set up an amazing editorial board. We've got editorial board members. I think we've got 104 editorial board members all over the world. We've got, interestingly, practitioners in artificial intelligence around the world. The gender balance is about 11% female, but yet we've got in the order of about 50% women on our board. So and what the journal is very much looking to do is reach a much wider audience than my other journal. I'll talk about the other journal in a moment. AI and Ethics is aimed at publishing really high quality work from the people who are kind of scientists, academics, engineers who are developing AI and doing that research and development, but also the corporate sector that is developing products and systems for AI, the users of AI, companies that are buying those products and using the systems, for the people who are developing the ethical and governance and regulatory and even lawmaking frameworks for AI, and the public. And I think that means our audiences for AI and ethics are much more diverse than our other journal, which is very much aimed at the kind of scientific and academic engineering community doing that kind of technical R&D. So AI and Ethics is a journal aimed at a much more diverse range of audiences. And what we want to be is useful to the community. We want to be useful in terms of providing an outlet for people to publish their work, but also for people to read what we publish and then learn from it and make use of that. So please do go and have a look at our journal. As I said, the first material we published, fantastic group of thought leadership pieces, and the first peer-reviewed material. It was published last week. And I gave you just a little bit of a flavor of that. These three papers, Jamie Brandon, Dave Lauer, and Kevin Lagrangier, are three leading thinkers in the world on the areas of AI and ethics. Jamie Brandon works for a company called Coal Miner, who are looking at do a lot of automated call center work, and very much looking at ensuring that they eliminate kind of bias and build ethical systems. David Lauer, as I mentioned, works in financial technology in New Jersey. And Kevin Lagrange is really interested in the future of human work. And I know there's been a few questions in the session about the future of human work and what AI is going to mean there. So please do go and have a look at those pieces. I'm going to take you very quickly back through to the bit about my other journal, Neural Computing Applications. So as I mentioned, Neural Computing Applications, I've been editor-in-chief of this journal since 1996, and I've been involved with it since 1991. It's a journal that started very small and very specifically for practitioners of neural computing here in the UK. It's broadened out now to cover an awful lot more than just neural networks and broader AI technologies. And as you can see from the graph, it's absolutely boomed in terms of, we now receive thousands of submissions from academic scientists and engineers all over the world. So please go and have a look at both of the journals and see what you think in terms of the content. Have a look and see, and for those that are working in these fields, do have a look at this movie. I mentioned this movie, We Need to Talk About AI, made by Leanne Pooley, who's based in New Zealand, but with the help of a friend of mine, David Malone, who's also on an editorial board. This is a really, really good movie to try and articulate the issues, the ethical issues about the future development of AI. And I think, have a look at that movie. It's about 90 minutes long. It's a documentary, and I think you'll find it very, very interesting. So, so back to colleagues and questions. So, research on low-income housing needs to analyze spatial use inside occupying, the use of sensors and other AI data. Yeah. The pandemic makes it impossible to conduct physical observatory surveys, and also ethical considerations. I think the ethical considerations of capturing that data aren't really an AI question. They're just more a privacy question, aren't they? So I think that's important to recognize. I think the idea of using AI and other statistical modeling techniques to be able to interpret and interpolate all of the data from the sensors that you'd be using, I think is a very, very good approach. Of course, at the moment, pandemics make it impossible to do physical observatories, but I suppose the question I would ask is, where are you getting your data from, and how have you, where are the sensors, and how are you getting data at the moment? It sounds to me like a very, very interesting application of AI, and I think I'd be interested to see the results. So, any other questions?
I think Ola BC has got a question. He has got to raise up his hand. So maybe can you just ask it by opening your mic?
Right. Thank you very much. Right. So what I wanted to ask Professor Macintyre is, what would you advise in terms of how to use the sensors and that sort of thing? I'm asking because my research is in Lagos, Nigeria. It is a developing country, as I'm sure you're aware. We don't have the kind of infrastructure, internet connectivity and all that is available in the West. But I'd just like to know if you could just maybe give me some advice, maybe later on, as to how to go about this project.
Certainly happy to contact you outside of the this conversation and maybe see if I can help you. I mean, the issue of the sensors and gathering data, that's not really an AI question. That's, I think, a physical infrastructure question in terms of how you can gather the data you need for your research. One of the things, if you're using AI tools, you need to be aware of is it goes back to the things I said right at the beginning of the presentation, which is you need a lot of data. So if you're only able to get a small amount of data, then AI tools probably aren't the right approach. And you might want to take a different approach in terms of looking at mathematical correlations and stuff. But certainly, I'd be happy to see if I can advise. A question in the chat was, would the generic journal propose standards to other journals? And it's published by Salesforce AI team, which include ethics considerations. Certainly there are, well, a question about proposing standards. The journal is not to advocate one standard or another, but it's to certainly advocate and promote the big discussion and debate around the need for all of us to understand how to go about approaching the questions of ethics in AI and what to do and what to avoid. I've already mentioned the IEEE standards work, which I think is very, very good. And so, have a look at that. There are a variety of organizations. I showed you the framework that BMW has developed. And, go and have a look at that. Interestingly, Hitachi is also developing a corporate framework for the development of ethical AI. Have a look at some of the work that we've published. The Salesforce AI team, interestingly, the work that and the paper that I showed you there by Jamie Brandon, I think would be relevant. So go and have a look at that. It's from Rashid. Are there virtual international conferences in the future? There's certainly many. I think if the question is, are there virtual international conferences on AI and ethics? What's certainly happening now is the big AI conferences are including strands on AI and ethics. And a good example of that is AAAI. AAAI is the American Association of Artificial Intelligence, which is the largest AI conference in the world. And that conference certainly is including a kind of theme on AI and ethics. IJCNN, which is the International Joint Conference on Neural Networks, is also starting to build into its program considerations around ethics. I'm involved with conferences in Europe, Engineering Applications of Neural Networks, EANN, at the World CIST conference. So there are many of the big AI conferences and indeed big computer science conferences, which are now including themes on AI and questions around kind of ethics. So certainly there are many of those. So does anybody have any final questions for me?
Well, maybe like, for example, that we have got if we publish in your journal, for example, so what what may be the criteria for publishing? And Olabisi, do you have a question? You have raised your hand. I've seen that you raised your hand again. Or there is a past tense. Okay, maybe like the criteria of getting published, for example.
Yeah. So again, I'll share my screen just very quickly.
Okay. So I'll allow you to share the screen first.
Okay. And just take colleagues back to there. So you can see the web address for the journal. There's a set of author guidelines on the journal website, not only about the process of submitting your paper and how we'll take it through independent peer review, but also look at the aims and scope of the journal, very, very clear, show you kind of the various thematic areas that we cover and what the aims and scope of the journal are. And of course, we also adhere very, very strongly to the Code of Publishing Ethics. So have a look at all of that. All of that will give you everything you need to know about what we're looking to publish. And for original work, we'll also remember we'll take you through peer review.
So would that be like more like qualitative or quantitative that may be much more easier to get published?
We're both qualitative and quantitative types of approaches would be valid, because as I mentioned before, this is a journal which is very, very kind of eclectic and diverse. So the Neural Computing and Applications journal is very, very scientific and mathematical and kind of engineering dense, whereas AI and ethics is more discursive, and so qualitative and quantitative discussions, I think, are perfectly valid.
So it is like both of them will be perfectly fine, right?
Yeah.
And then for your another journal that you have mentioned is the neural computing one. How about that one? Because that one, it is like some of them may have got strong interest in that as well.
Yeah, that's very, very much more technical and kind of what I would call engineering and scientific and mathematical. Okay. So very much more an empirical approach. I'll stop sharing this now. So. Okay.
So that one is more like the empirical stuff, but for this one, the AI ethics is like less. Okay, we have got a question that is that the current focus is on neural computing. So that belief that the progress will not be made without some return to symbolic computing. Any views?
So you, if I understand the comment correctly, that you don't think that progress will be made in artificial intelligence without a return to symbolic computing? I don't agree with that. I think neural computing and indeed broadly AI is progressing in a variety of different ways. The predominant ways actually are about models which mimic nature. So neural computing is a very, 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 very simplified model of individual brain cells, and then the connections between them to create networks of neurons, which of course is a very simplified kind of description of the structure of the human brain, but at a hugely, hugely simplified level. What we see, if you look at the neural computing applications, what you'd see is the development of what I call mimics of nature. Of course, nature has evolved solutions to problems over hundreds of millions of years. And there are many examples of AI systems which are mimicking those solutions and applying them to particular problems or particular applications in human experience. So there are algorithms which are based around bat echolocation, algorithms based around how a dragonfly's eye processes images, algorithms based on how ants forage for food. And these types of, and many more, cuckoo and various other mechanisms and algorithms, which are mimics of nature, I think are the kind of way that AI is moving. So, and that's not about symbolic computing, that's about effectively mathematical models which are attempts to be simplistic mimics of nature. Someone's asked a question about, is the journal free of charge? No, it isn't. It depends on which the articles are. We're trying to make as much of the material in AI and ethics as free to access as we possibly can, but it is still based on a publishing model of subscription, either personal subscription or institutional subscription, but with a number of the articles being made free to access. Someone's asked about sharing free journals in the areas of AI and engineering. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what I'm being asked there, but I'm not sure I can help with free journals. I'm sorry.
Some free of journals without APC. But then I think that AI ethics is also without APC, right? No need to be charges, right?
So it's as I mentioned before, it's elements of free to access, but not necessarily open access. So Emmanuel's made that comment about a monstrous model as GPT-3. Yeah, well, that's a very good comment, and what that relates to really is the fact that GPT-3, like all of the other AI models, are narrow AI, and GPT-3 doesn't understand anything actually, not just concepts of addition, because AI doesn't. That's not how AI works. AI doesn't understand anything. It can create a mathematical model of a problem, and then create mappings, which then become might look intelligent, but probably aren't. So that's a really interesting kind of comment, and yeah, GPT-3 I think has caused stirred up a lot of interest.
Maybe like some of them they are not expert in GPT-3, so maybe like
so
GPT instead.
An AI model that was developed, which is being used to write journalistic articles, and it's actually published. So the idea that an AI model could kind of replace the function of a human journalist, which is interesting, and yet, as Emmanuel said, but this is a model which, because it's creating new journalistic content, is an interesting one, isn't it? But the idea that that's not intelligent, so it creates the illusion of intelligence, and as Emmanuel said, doesn't actually understand concepts of addition, I think is an interesting way to look at this kind of issue, the limitation of narrow intelligence. So, yes, I think, yeah, I'm sure, Emmanuel, we could carry on for hours and hours and hours and have debates on the philosophical nature of understanding of intelligence, and concepts of understanding would be a really interesting one.
Yeah, today's talk will end at 5. So apart from these, I see if you have got anything that you would like to ask. But I myself have got a question that is like, nowadays that it has got more emphasizes on like the pathway to impact assessment. So like, for example, when we write the grant or whatsoever, that they usually ask us like, so what actually is a pathway? Now, say for instance, if I do some prediction that is like for the stock market, stock prices, so they also ask us the question as like, so how would you achieve like the pathway to impact assessment? So what is your view on that? Because usually it is like, it is not really for that we try to write it on like by using the AI method to do some prediction, for example. So what is your own view towards these type of thing that is not like those like medicine, or making a AI that it can detect, for example, whether it's cancer or not cancer, that the pathway will be much more clearer. But then if we talk about like just do something as like prediction for the stock prices, for example, so that is also using AI approach, the machine learning.
Yeah. To some degree, that goes to the issue of what is often referred to as stochastic systems. So systems which are kind of noisy and unpredictable.
Yeah.
And AI is being already used, as I mentioned before. David Lauer, and his paper talks intrinsically about the idea that if you don't have a solid principled ethical grounding, that you can't possibly build ethical AI. One thing follows another. But David's work and others who work in the fintech area, financial technology, mentioned in the presentation the idea that high speed, high volume trading for a long time has been predominantly kind of enacted by AI, because it's happening at such speed that human intervention is impossible. The fact that you've then got AI designed to influence the AI doing the trading, so you've now got an AI which is being built and has been taught how other AI behaves, and is learning the nature of how that AI behaves and then is influencing it. I think leads you to big questions about how can you therefore know where that's going? How can you do an impact assessment? How would you know what the impact's going to be?
Yeah.
And it goes back also again to the question of governance frameworks and the issue of what's referred to as human agency and human oversight. How do you create human agency? How do you put the human in the loop of systems which are operating at such speed and such volume that it's impossible for a human to oversee them? And therefore, how would you do impact assessments on that? So, of course, what you can do in the idea of kind of some of that would come from the principles of ethics by design and building ethical principles into the design of the AI, which by definition gives you some opportunity to understand upfront what you think the impacts would be, where the negative impacts would be, and how you kind of mitigate against those. But there is the worry, I suppose, that in some of the developments of AI, that you can't predict all of the outcomes.
Yeah.
And therefore, how can you necessarily understand what the impacts would be or do an impact assessment and mitigate against them? And that, I think, is a real area of concern, especially for these kind of very real-time AI systems. I think that's there are some issues to address there.
Yeah, because it is like what I think is that some kind of research, they do not have an impact immediately. But to a certain extent, that by the time that you have done the research, like for example, if we talk about the mathematics, for example, mathematical models that at the very beginning, by the time they do some research, they may have no impact at all. So the impact will be very minimum. So that is like those mathematicians, they know something about, or you have got a paper. But then after some time, like 20 or 30 years later, that this kind of mathematics that may be applied to, like for example, physics or some other areas. So it means that the impact in itself, by the time they write something like this, that it may be non-existent at all. But the question is like how to say something that is like to let the others know that yes, there is an impact, even if we talk about like now at Pleasant, and then this is I think it is something for which that they.
Yeah. I think it is a big issue. I think, of course, one of the things that's happening is as AI is developing, there's more of an evidence base, there's more data, and I think one of the things that has changed, certainly in the 30 years I've been involved in applied AI, is the power of the AI technologies, but also the capacity to deal with much bigger corpuses of data. And that gives an element of surety and robustness if the AI and the data is well understood. And that goes to a question that was asked by one of the audience around data mining techniques and understanding data better. But the ability to create more robust AI models by using greater bodies of data so that they represent the problem space better, and that you can then, and of course, as that increases through the application of AI, what you build is what we might call smarter and more robust systems, which incrementally get smarter. And that's, I think, a potentially positive aspect of the development of AI.
Oh, okay. Much more smarter AI. So it is like...
Which becomes increasingly smarter the more it's used and the more data it's presented with. Because like we learn through our experiences, by giving more data to AI and presenting it with more data, so the potential is for the AI to learn and get smarter.
So, but then which one that you think that it is, like if we try to use a prediction, so which one that may be possible for making it as like much more smarter? Because what we have seen is that probably expandable AI that we have got more and more program that is designed for this, like for example, Crowd, or for some other, like Google Crowd, for example, they have provided something like that. That is for the expandable AI. But then for the ethical AI, is there any something that is similar for which that we can do that? And then for applying in, say for instance, a prediction or some other thing else?
Yeah. So the answer is going back to that issue of the more an AI system sees data, and particularly data for which there is what the AI would predict, and then what the actual result was, if you see what I mean. And so what you can do is measure the error. And so where the AI gets it wrong and how much it gets it wrong, and then being able to learn to correct that error means the AI progressively gets better.
Oh, okay.
So that's the idea of kind of recursive error minimization is and has been part of the way we build AI, and it's built into the objective function of the AI. So identifying what the goal is, what the error is, and then minimizing the error.
Okay.
So
thank you.
I think that's all of the questions.
Yeah.
And before my croaky voice goes out altogether, I just like to say once again, it's a shame about the stupid person who was doing terrible things with the Zoom bomb, but that's, unfortunately the nature of life. I'd like to say a big thanks to you, Rita, and to your colleagues for the invitation to talk today, and a big thanks to the audience for joining and listening. I hope it's been interesting.
Thanks to you. A big thanks to you, actually.
Well,
all of your hectic schedule.
No, my pleasure. And certainly by the questions, I think this has been a really interesting dialogue, and using these online platforms is never as good as being together in person, but it also does give, I think, a wider group of people the opportunity to participate. And certainly by the questions, there have been some really interesting questions, and I hope the answers have been, at least partly interesting and a little bit useful. So I'd like to say big thanks to everyone. The AI is all around us. You are interacting with AI in so many ways all the time without knowing it. It is part of your life, and it will be part of your life, and become an increasing part of life. Much AI is invisible. It's happening even though you don't know it. And I suppose that's one of the areas of risk is that there are things happening around finance systems, around health systems, around social media, which are where AI is making hopefully positive contributions, but without you necessarily being aware of them. And I think simply being aware that that is happening, and then looking at these big questions about where AI is going in the future, I think is a very, very important discussion and debate to have. I hope that you do go and have a look at the two journals I've mentioned. See what we're doing with those. And if people are working in the field of AI and ethics, please submit your work to us, and indeed applied AI. Submit your work to one of our two journals. We'd be delighted to receive it. And finally, of course, I used COVID as an exemplar of to try and explain us some of these issues with AI. We're all still living through an extraordinary time, and I just hope that everyone does stay safe and well, and my best wishes for the future.
Yeah, if some of them that they are interested in, like for example, making a special issue to yours, your two journal, any of the one journal, so they can contact you for further information, or like what kind of information they have to submit it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I think I put my email on the end of the presentation, and Rita, you've got the slides, so you can share them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone.
So thanks very much. Okay. So thanks very much for this excellent presentation. And then I think there will be no more question for now. But then in the future, we will also organize some other webinar, and hope to see you all again in the next time. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.